Between Mitch McConnell's announcement of his retirement as Senate Minority Leader and the attempts by the Supreme Court conservatives to slow things down to benefit Donald Trump, we've gotten a real window this week into the machinery of modern conservatism. But another case before the High Court may be an even more revealing example of just how far right our system has been taken in recent years, all out of proportion to public opinion. It goes back to the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history at the Las Vegas Music Festival in 2017. Just a horrific scene. I was there in the aftermath for a week. At that shooting, the gunman fired hundreds of shots into the crowd using what are called bump stocks on his rifles, which allow a semi-automatic AR-15 to simulate a machine gun.
Okay. That was faster than I expected.
Following that horrific shooting using that tool, a shooting that left 60 people dead and more than 400 injured. Remember, he was camped out in the window just shooting down on people for a very long time. Multiple polls showed that more than, wait for it, 80% of Americans wanted bump stocks banned. Numbers so overwhelming that Donald Trump took action. Donald Trump directing the ATF to classify them as machine guns. Imagine a shooting device so horrifying, the Trump administration wanted it banned. You know who doesn't? Well, the pro-gun right, which sued the ATF over its Trump-era ruling with legal aid from a group, of course, bankrolled in part by one of the Koch brothers. The case made its way to the Supreme Court, and the oral arguments this week suggested most of the conservative justices are ready to overturn the ban. Again, the ban that 80% of Americans and Donald Trump wanted in the aftermath of a truly horrific shooting. Why? Because, as Slate's Mark Joseph Stern writes, this particular ban sits at the intersection of two obsessions on a legal right: demolishing gun safety legislation and dismantling the administrative state. So once again, here's the Supreme Court considering a wildly unpopular action, right? Because it furthers far-right aims. But they don't have to worry. They're there for decades, wielding minority power as the full vision of modern conservatism. And Kate Coppins is a staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of Romney: A Reckoning. He's also our newest MSNBC political contributor, which I'm very happy about, and he joins me now. McKay, it's great to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris.
So I think this bump stock thing is it's so perfect because I think it shows why Mitch McConnell went to the lengths he went to keep that seat open when Scalia died and to rush through Amy Coney Barrett. Why Donald Trump won in 2016 as that seat was open. Why he is sort of delivered for conservatives in a way no other president had. And why fundamentally the court now is truly the cornerstone of what modern conservatism is. As someone who's been covering the conservative movement for over a decade, what do you think?
Republicans made a calculation a number of years ago that the way that they could wield power most effectively in government was through the judiciary. And I think they understood this before a lot of people on the left did, right? They have been laying the groundwork for this for really decades. And what this case is about that we're talking about here is it's really not about the Second Amendment or gun rights. It's about one of the longest running and most far-reaching goals of the conservative legal project, which is to dismantle the administrative state, right? To weaken the federal government. And I think this is one case of many where you see conservatives able to achieve their ideological aims regardless of popularity or pressure from the electorate. This is why, like you said, the conservative Supreme Court is so valuable to them, and why basically the machinery of Republican power over the last decade plus has been oriented around capturing the judiciary.
You know, this sort of administrative state and wanting to gut it, which is another huge case we're going to get from the court this term, possibly overturning decades of law about what the federal bureaucracy can do, basically saying, like, stripping it of its power. This is also key, I think, to the governing vision of a second Trump term. If you read, you know, the Project 2025, you listen to Stephen Miller and Stephen Bannon and even Donald Trump, the idea is there's all these federal bureaucrats. We're going to get rid of them, or we're just going to hire people that like a corrupt, urban machine, like the Daily Machine,
literally,
right?
Right.
And everybody just does what we tell them to do, and that's how we're going to go and try to deport 8 to 10 million people.
That's right, and I've been writing about this for the past several months because I do think it's important for people to understand that this isn't like speculation. It's not a secret, right? The Trump administration, the future Trump administration, Donald Trump and his allies have made very clear what they want to do when they take power back, and that is to effectively replace civil servants with political loyalists. I mean, you said it's like a corrupt party machine. I don't even think they would dispute that. They might quibble with the word corrupt, but they literally want to. I talked to Paul Dans, who runs this project at the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, and he literally said this is a top-to-bottom renovation of the federal government that we want to undertake. And I think you're right that this is all of a piece with the same goal, which is to make it so that the federal government doesn't really have any power to interpret and enforce law based on expertise or, objective analysis of what needs to be done, but rather based on what their party boss, their party leader wants.
Yeah, and when you come back around to what the checks are on that, you end up back at the court. And I've been thinking about this a lot when you compare the first term to the second term, which is the federal courts did do some, not all, but some restraining of Trump in that first term. But it wasn't the 6-3 court. It wasn't the Dobbs court. It wasn't this court. And you got to imagine, and I wonder if you think the same, that there would be a lot more leeway for a second Trump term on that score than there was in the first.
So this is something I've been wondering about a lot, frankly, because I think that we have gotten used to the idea that the judiciary will save us, right? We still have the courts. And what I would say is that I've actually done some reporting on the inner workings, the internal politics of the Supreme Court. And what I found is that these justices, for the most part, at least several of the conservative justices, they're not loyal to Trump. They're not enthralled to Donald Trump as a personality. In fact, several of them don't like him. But what they are committed to is this broader ideological project. And to the extent that the Trump administration is doing things that are outside of precedent to advance that project, I don't see any reason to believe that the courts will put a check on that.
Yeah, I think that's correct and astute. McKay Coppins, thanks so much. Great to have you on board.
Thank you.
So we've been covering the gap between the kind of mealy-mouthed platitudes of politicians who recognize their actual views on reproductive rights are totally unpopular and who basically want to trick people, the gap between what they say and what they do. In fact, the Speaker of the House, Republican Mike Johnson, said just yesterday he supports IVF.
Look, I believe in the sanctity of every human life, always have. And because of that, I support IVF and its availability. It needs to be readily available. It needs to be something that every American supports, and it needs to be handled in an ethical manner. So we'll continue to support that.
Okay, it needs to be handled in an ethical manner. That's the key part there, right? I believe in IVF, needs to be readily available, but ethical matter, what's he mean by that? So that's what he stood at the podium and said. Well, crucially, if you want to know what that ethical matter he's referring to is, he remains a co-sponsor of the Life at Conception bill, which would codify personhood at the moment of fertilization and full 14th Amendment due process rights for frozen embryos with absolutely no carve-out for IVF. A reminder to watch what they do, not what they say. Today, we have more evidence of that. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina introduced a non-binding resolution that does nothing except, quote, express support for continued access to fertility care like IVF. And even this pathetically toothless resolution gets only 6 Republican co-sponsors. But get this. Yesterday, 145 Republicans in Congress filed an amicus brief asking the Supreme Court to restrict access to the abortion drug mifepristone. And in asking the court to ban the mailing of abortion pills anywhere in the U.S., they cite the Comstock Act. That's a basically dead law from the 1870s, named after an infamous misogynistic anti-vice crusader that banned the mailing of obscene materials or anything, quote, intended for the prevention of contraception or procuring of abortion. Mind you, more than half of all abortions in the U.S. were medication abortions in 2020. Mifepristone is the drug commonly used in that procedure. A right-wing anti-abortion district judge in Texas already tried to ban mifepristone nationwide. And just a few weeks, the Supreme Court will actually hear that case that started with him. And so those 145 Republicans in Congress are affirmatively choosing to sign an amicus brief. They don't have to. They are just announcing to you their real intentions. Congresswoman Katie Porter is a Democrat of California. She's a member of the pro-choice caucus. She's a candidate for the Senate in 2024, and she joins me now. I'm curious, as a member of Congress, what you make. I was cracking up the Nancy Mace thing, and here's why I was cracking up at it. It does seem like an easy slam dunk. Like, they know they have a problem. This wild Alabama State Supreme Court decision, which imperiled IVF in that state, the co-sponsorship of the Life at Conception, Act. Like, why wouldn't they rush to do that?
Well, I mean, look, this entire thing is about Nancy Mace being performative, about the Republican Party trying to convince people and lull them into thinking that they will not come for every last bit of women's freedom to make their own decisions about their health and about when and if to start a family. Look, people said Roe would never fall. It fell. Now they're saying, well, they never attack things like IVF. Well, they never attack birth control. Wake up, America. Everyone who is a woman or knows and loves a woman and believes in freedom ought to be up in arms about this. And the only solution here is vote them out.
Do you think if the results of the 2024 election were that the Republicans took majorities in both houses of Congress and elected Donald Trump to be the president, is there any doubt in your mind whether they would sign a national abortion ban?
No. You know why? Because they've said they will do exactly that. As you point out, they are relying, the Republicans, 145 of them, 90% of whom are men, who signed that amicus brief, are relying on the Comstock Act. What does that apply to? It applies to the prevention of contraception. The prevention of pregnancy, the prevention of conception. That means it applies to birth control, to contraception. So this is the beginning. And if we don't act, it will be the end. So I think we have to quit mincing words and quit trying to reassure Americans. Our rights are under attack and we need to fight like hell.
I wonder how you think that people hear that in the state of California, because one of the things that has happened post-Dobbs is that, the bifurcation of the states, right? It was quote unquote, returned to the states. And that means that some states have outlawed abortions. Some states have actually secured abortion rights, have reaffirmed them, right? Actually put them into statutory protections. But for people in a state like California, do you think voters are aware that those state protections are going to be superseded by national legislation if these people who want to ban abortion manage to win power?
Californians definitely feel safe. They feel like they can make their own choices here, and we have leadership in our state that has reassured them of that. But the reality is this is just simple fifth grade civics class. The federal government has the ability to make laws that are supreme to state law. So when Trump says there will be a nationwide abortion ban, there won't be one thing a single lawmaker in California can do about it.
Do you think this issue in your conversation, both in your campaigning in California for the soon-to-be open Senate seat, and also in the context of traveling the state and thinking about this 2024 election, I think some people misapprehend how salient the issue is. My sense is that it's every bit as salient as the day Dobbs came out, and even more so. Do you get that sense from the voters that you talk to, or do you think people have sort of been lulled in some false sense of security in a state like California?
Well, it's very, very important to people to have the freedom to make this decision for themselves. That, I think, is as strong and as urgent, and people feel really strongly about it. And each time we've actually seen this issue be put cleanly on the ballot for an up-down vote, Americans across the country have said they want their own rights to make their own decisions. The problem has been that we're not making it clear to voters that this is on the ballot in every single federal election, in every part and pocket of this country. It's on the ballot in California. And, you know, in the Senate race, we have had colleagues, I've had Democratic colleagues say things like, you know, the decision to reverse Roe, it's a sign of things to come. It's not a sign of anything. It is actually resulting in women and girls dying right now. And so I think that reflects the lack of urgency, that kind of language. This is a harbinger of what's to come. This is part of the gradual erosion of our democracy. It is about people not having freedom today. It is about our daughters having less freedom than we had. And so I think there needs to be more urgency on this from elected leaders across the country, including here in California.